Okay, well, hello and welcome, everybody. I'm glad you joined me tonight. There is something that's been on my mind, and it's one of those things that really gets me fired up. It is the every now and again you'll see a kind of resurgence in the people that rail against the Nokian, the person that seems to have that understanding of the heathen world view. And imagine the neckbeard kind of shaking as I say that of someone that really understands the role that Loki plays in the world. And every time I hear that, all I can think of is you are retarded. Let's take a real close look at that. You know, the first problem everybody has with that is they want to say, oh, well, everybody thinks she's the Christian devil. No, that's not what everyone thinks. That's nowhere near what I've written about for the last 6 years. It is not anywhere near the conclusions I've come to with regards to the development of heathenry as a faith, as a way of life. You know, we've sat here and we have worked with Asatru since what 1968, and we're still splitting hairs about that kind of nonsense. Well, heck, it's no wonder we're no farther than we are. You have one organization in this world that's actually doing something, and I'm a part of it. But back to the Loki thing. If you look, everyone says, "Well, all the gods and goddesses are they're of Jotun stock." Yes, they are. And you know what every one of them have done? Every one of them have risen to the challenge. They have made sacrifices of ego and personality to become something more than they are. And it's told as Odin sacrifices himself on the tree. It is told as Odin and Tyr and Thor go and grab the kettle for Eager's feast, and he has to deal with Tyr's parents. It's told again and again of these gods and goddesses that sacrifice something and still rise to the occasion. They don't wallow around in self pity and maudlin sympathy. they they step up to the plate and become something more. And if there's anything at the root of heathenry that's going to help move all of us forward into something other than just a bunch of neckbeards talking about it on the internet, it's got to be the fact that we can rise above some of these challenges we've put in our own way and become something more. How else are we going to justify our position at the table of the world's faiths? Whether you like it or not, whether you feel like you've been bamboozled or not, whether you think you've been hustled and lied to by these great monotheistic traditions, they are still great monotheistic traditions with literally billions of followers. Do you think people are going to shed that idea overnight and say, hey, I think I'm going to come over here to listen to somebody talk about why they really understand Loki and the role he plays in the Norse pantheon and what he's really all about? No. Nobody's interested in hearing about that. Nobody's interested in hearing about some kind of front-loaded message about whatever you think you've got to be heathen. It's the indigenous tribal faith of the peoples of Northern Europe. It's just that simple. Nothing more, nothing less. That faith, that way of life, for thousands of years provided purpose, guidance, and direction for literally millions of people. We're just now beginning to broach those numbers under the larger pagan umbrella. People don't even like to talk about that. Well, those people aren't really heathens, so they're not really pagans. Oh? Says who? What criteria do you put on that to make sure that you feel bigger than they do? How so? And therein lies the problem with Loki. And people don't even realize it. Here you have an individual who represents the uninspired human intellect and all of his ego-driven behavior as he runs amok among these gods and goddesses who have excelled at becoming something more. People say, well, Odin was deceitful. Oh? When? Was he deceitful to who? What was he doing? Let me tell you something. He was stacking the deck in the favor of his son. Loyalty to his family, that kind of stuff. And I can go into that too, and probably will, because I think people need to have that clarified as well. He was kind of a dodgy character. That is the same kind of attitude. That is the same kind of nonsense that the uninspired human intellect demonstrates when he sits at the table at Ygri's feast and hurls insults at the gods that are all around in that table. It is a clear demonstration of his lack of understanding of how the divine interacts with each other. Based on his own limited, short-sighted, he can see no further than the end of his nose. The limits of his understanding of spiritual development begin and end with the magnificence of his own ego. The first instance, when he stands at the edge of the crowd, he can't be a part of the crowd. He grabs the blind man who cannot see the way, whispers in his ear, fires into the center of the party. He gets that fringe element and tells him something, whispers these ideas into his ear. And the fringe element, much like Antifa hurling itself into the middle of American politics and elsewhere in the world, and steals the light of the sun from everybody. Talking about you can be a part of it too. Not really going to tell you how. We're just going to do it. That fringe element loses its life. That fringe element loses what it's supposed to be. The light of the world is gone. And here we have Loki standing at the edge of the crowd, unwilling or unable. He cannot or he will not attempt to measure up to the same standard that Balder is. Even though he has a seat at the table, even though he is in that group, even though he is present around all of these divine beings with all of these examples of beings that are striving to become something better, he opts for the shallow way out. He'll just eliminate the competition, the uninspired human intellect. And we see it most often on Facebook as that kind of political and character assassination that you see when people make some kind of snide comment because they cannot or will not measure up to even the standard that I've put forth with regards to the books I've written. I've seen it happen 100 times. I'll scroll through there any given time during any given day and see somebody make a smart aleck comment, but you will never see them write about it in their own book, but they will engage in that character assassination like the uninspired human intellect. Get it through your heads. I'm going to say it again and again till you figure it out. Next thing people say, oh, well, he provided all those great weapons. Yeah, he did. And he tried to cheat out of that too. He harassed the dwarves as they were making them. But what you got to remember is, and this is a key thing, the reason he's doing all of that is because of his assault upon a valuable feminine figure within the tribe. He assaulted the divine feminine in that tribe and robbed her of her hair, the glorious thing that every woman thinks makes her pretty, her hair. The first sign we look at to see how well a woman takes care of herself, her beauty. Those are the things. He doesn't owe just Thor. He doesn't owe just Sif. See, he attacked the divine feminine. He owes the entire tribe shield in a magnificent way. See, he couldn't measure up to that standard. See, the thing is, he's got a girlfriend, Sigyn. And we'll get to her in a moment. But in his effort to be like Odin without doing any of the necessary sacrifice, the cathartic effort to rid oneself of this out of proportion idea of who we think we are, like Odin does when he hangs upon the tree, learns the runes, hears the songs of his ancestors, gives them to Rig, and Rig shares them with mankind. Loki sneaks off into the woods, picks up whatever trailer park trash he can find over there, and has 3 monsters that threaten the well-being of the tribe and the world. The great grandfather, the original Sky Father, the original possessor of Gungnir, Tyr loses a hand because of it. In that just sacrifice necessary to ensure the safety of the tribe. But people want to give him credit for creating the weapons. We need to be a little more in depth with our thought process with regards to that. His assault upon the divine feminine, he owed the entire tribe shield. In his efforts to prove he's every bit as good as Odin, he sneaks off and creates a bunch of monsters that threaten the security of the world. The tribe suffers because of his efforts again and again. And those weapons ultimately fail them at Ragnarok, don't they? But we're supposed to believe that in some manner we have to hold him in some kind of special regard because he got the dwarves to create, and he cheated them out of that too. See, all of us have a position, have a seat at the table. All of us, as we join Asatru, have the opportunity to become something more. If we're willing to do the growth, if we're willing to make those sacrifices of self, if we're willing to let go of those limiting ideals that keep us bound to whatever nonsense we think is important in this world, to become something more, to understand the runes, to learn the language of the birds. Listen, it is no accident that it is Rig, that it is Heimdall that takes his life at Ragnarok, that takes Loki's life. Heimdall as Rig has spent an inordinate amount of time teaching and being accepted into these relationships between the great grandmother and father, the grandmother and father, and the mother and the father. As they accept the divine into their relationship, their children become better because of it. Rig spends a lot of time with these people. And finally, when he calls Jarl his own, when Cone Rig learns the language of the birds and learns the use of the runes, he sheds the word cone and becomes Rig himself. That's a path of human development there, in case we weren't paying attention to it. And it centers around those ideas of accepting the divine into our relationships and ensuring a better future for our children. We have that opportunity to perhaps become divine ourselves. That is why Rig is the one that takes Loki's life, because Loki is the uninspired human intellect that will never be able to accept that divine into his home, that will never hear the language of the songs of his ancestors, that will never learn the usage of the runes. The best effort he can come up with is to hide in the iron woods with Angerboda and create monsters that threaten the world. Now, on an important note there, I do not consider Hel to be one of his offspring. I think she is a much far older being and goddess. But having said all that, you still got two pretty potent monsters you got to deal with. And they're monsters in our own life. What wraps up your thinking process day in and day out that you will need the Warder of Men to help you deal with? What rage threatens to burst from your soul and burst the fetters that you've placed on it and puts at risk the safety and security of everyone around you? All of them are based upon an ego. How great you would be, how dangerous you would be. And they put at risk your safety, your freedom, and whatever else, and your relationships. These are the offspring of the uninspired human intellect. Those consuming rages that destroy friendships, families, and relationships, and that thought process that encircles everything you do, that makes you wonder or feeds the idea, well, I'm really greater than I think I am, blah, 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 and makes you the blowhard nobody wants to listen to. So yeah, if you want to talk about the Nokian, you go right ahead, because I will immediately put you in a place that tells me that the depth of your spirituality is about as deep as a teaspoon. At Eager's feast, when he shows up there, he's run off. They're all sitting at the table. They're having a grand time. They've got a kettle that's a mile wide, brewing all the mead they want. And there's one person in there, one individual, one being, and Loki resorts to his old tricks. You have somebody in there garnering the attention and praise of the gods and goddesses seated there, and he cannot stand it. So he kills him. He cannot or will not measure up to the standard, so he eliminates the competition. The character assassination, the actual physical act, whatever you want to call it. Instead of measuring up, instead of growing, instead of sacrificing, instead of developing, instead of working out, instead of reading, instead of training, instead of doing anything to make yourself better, people today will just get online and make some kind of shitty comment to say, well, you don't need to read his stuff. I mean, he doesn't really know anything. I mean, he just doesn't understand the heathen worldview. And the neckbeards begin to shake like gobbling turkeys all over the world. And it's an amazing thing to watch, and I laugh heartily every time I see it. Be that as it may, he continues on when he comes in there and demands hospitality. just like these neckbeards and these high-minded individuals that think they understand how he's supposed to be in the pantheon. He sits there and demonstrates, as a justification for him to be there, a complete lack of understanding of how the divine interacts with each other. Pay attention. You'll see it on social media. The lack of understanding is astounding. And like I said before, the first thing they'll do, they'll say, oh, well, he's not the Christian devil. That's not what he's there for. No, he's not. He's not the scapegoat for the ills of humanity. He's not the thing to blame. He is us. He is our shallow, short-sighted, ego-driven ideas, thought processes, and actions. In the company of the divine, we walk around in a world that we have the ability to shape with anything we want to, and yet we're going to say, oh, well, that doesn't work for me. Who does he think he is? Start hitting and engaging in all kinds of character assassination about successful people. I could build a cult right now using Christianity or some variant thereof, or even calling it Jesus. Doesn't even have to be that. Telling people someone will come down and take care of it for you. Come on in here and put $1 in the plate, and we'll make sure that he gets it, right? Come in here with your pain and your suffering and your heartache, and the next thing you know, when I'll lay hands on you, and the Holy Spirit and the great comforter and the Jesus will come and touch. No, the devil is the scapegoat that prevents that interferes with that. Somebody else to blame, so you don't have to change a single thing about who and what you are. And I see people come in here in heathenry and they get that confused. Yes, you got to grow up. You got to set a few things down. You got to quit acting like an ass. You got to stay out of jail. And you got to become something better. You don't have a scapegoat anymore. You have a clear identification in the lore of a thought process and an action and a mindset that handicaps our best efforts, even though we have a wonderful seat at the table and all of the opportunity in the world to become whatever it is we think we can become. It's clearly identified. Set it aside and become something more. And people want to argue whether or not we should be paying attention to that. Well, we don't need to be listening to Bryan Wilton. He doesn't. Then there they go again. I hear the neckbeards gobbling all over the world. After he finishes insulting all of the gods and goddesses, after he finishes demonstrating his lack of understanding of how the divine interacts with each other, these god and goddesses interact with each other on a scale we can't begin to imagine. From the cellular all the way up to the cosmic. Rivers run from the tops of mountain to the sea, turn into steam, become clouds, cycles, volcanoes, all of these wonderful flows of energies that are usually represented as the language of the birds and mythologies around the world. He demonstrates a wonderful misunderstanding of how all that works, humanizes them in an effort to justify his own bloated ego. He's going to take these divine aspects, bring them down kind of to his level by the labels that he wants to put on them so he can feel kind of equal. He has a seat at the table, but he's going to go ahead and insult everybody to bring them down to his level. That way he can feel good about being there and really doesn't have to do anything to justify sitting there. That's the part that gets me. And that's the part I see happening all the time. Not having to justify doing it. Don't have to step up to the plate and do anything. Just simply have to join a Facebook group, buy a hammer, and talk about, well, I've got an understanding. I've read this book by Saussure at the turn of the last century that gave me a clear understanding of this, or we are our deeds, or something. We are far more than our deeds, and we are far more than the examination of how this has been recorded through history. When he is bound with the son, with the guts of his sons, his descendants pay the price of his egotistical ideas. If you'll notice that those that accept that they accept into their marriage this divine aspect of Rig, their children prosper and flourish. And yet Loki's children, they're ripped apart by the world. those divine forces disembowel them and they bind to the Father. And Sigyn, this mother, and this, her name means girlfriend, she sits there and holds the plate over his head so he doesn't get any venom on his face. Like so many wives I see today who run interference and offer excuses for men who are lost in their cups. Who get off of work and come home and drink a beer and expects to be served hand and foot and everything taken care of. Basically expects to be mothered while they sit there and watch football games and dream about how important they are because they know this statistic or that statistic. And every single time a little bit of that venom, a little bit of the reality of what he's done gets on his face, the tongue lashing and the brutality are terrible to behold. How many drunks do you know that abuse their wives in that manner? How many wives do you know that are very grateful that it's not like that right now? So you tell me about how we're supposed to bring him in. You tell me how I'm supposed to look at that uninspired human intellect and cast all of that insight to the side. You tell me how the slayer of your brother's stepfather's son is supposed to be welcomed. Kinslayers are not to be welcomed. Kinslayers of any kind. Because they are the uninspired human intellect in action. They cannot live up to or measure up to or become strong enough to defend, and they become kinslayers through jealousy or whatever machinations that might be going on. So you think about that. Next time someone starts talking about what they think they really understand about Loki and how he needs to be brought in, you think about that. And you make a strong determination about what the quality of your faith in Asatru is supposed to look like. Because I can assure you one thing. If you listen to even a quarter of what I just said, and you adopt that into your life, and kind of keep that kind of chaos at bay, because that is the entire purpose of all faiths and way of life, is to create that barrier around our thinking processes that keeps chaos at bay. And when that becomes weak, when men are threatened by that chaos at the edge of their minds through whatever thought process has begun to dominate it, whatever victim mentality, whatever egotistical idea, whatever drug addiction, whatever exhaustion, whatever pain of loss has begun to corrupt or change or modify the thought process of a man who has up to now been pretty good in life, they will do almost anything to keep that chaos at bay. A wall must be built. But that's also a path. It's also a path to something that's far more fantastic than you can imagine. If you want to invite that uninspired human intellect, if you wanted to invite those ego-driven ideas of everything I just went over, and consider that good heathenry or an Asatru, I would submit to you, you've got a long way to go. If you want to grab a hold of any of the ideas that come to fruition with success, with living a powerful, good life, with having personal integrity, with having people look at you and refer to you as an honorable man or an honorable woman, if you want to stand up and endure and deal with and enjoy self-reliance, if you want to be able to be industrious and persevere, if you want to have courage, the first thing you're going to have to do is have the honesty to understand whether or not the thinking processes, the ideas, the attitudes that I just mentioned, which are what Loki represents in that pantheon of the gods, are they present in your mind? Are they a part of your thought process? Are you edgy and cool because you think you understand what it means? I would submit that the reason my books sell the way they do around the world is because they contain the intelligence and understanding of this literature that no one has put forth before. So at some point, after 40 or 50 years in Asatru, it's about time for us to grow up and demonstrate that unlike Loki at Eager's feast, we deserve and we are worthy of a seat at the table of the world religions. Because I think that once we are able to accomplish that, once we are able to get that understanding through our thick skulls that we've been told time and time again throughout history and religions and faiths and way of lives, we might be able to recalibrate the compass that is so woefully off track in the rest of this world. So think about that next time you see somebody talking about the great gobbling of the neckbeards, because that's what I'm going to refer to it as from now on. Every time I see somebody talking about it, well, they're a Noki, and I'm going to hear the great gobbling of the neckbeards. It's just kind of what it sounds like. And I hope you enjoyed that, because I'm going to laugh about that as soon as I turn this off. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Got that off my chest. I feel a little bit better. It's going to be a good day, huh? Give them hell.